Greetings, and thank you for coming to this presentation on Chivalric Orders in early Freemasonry, namely the rites of the Strict Observance, the Rectified Scottish Rite, and the Chevaliers Bienfaisants de la Cité Sainte of Jean-Baptiste Willermoz, the Martinist Master. Standard disclaimer. The opinions and statements of the presenter do not represent any positions or stance of any Masonic body, Grand Lodge, or Lodge, and are solely the viewpoints of the presenter. This presentation has been sourced from a number of publicly available sources, including publicly published materials and books, and original 1700s French manuscripts, available in French libraries and personally translated by the presenter. This presentation is given from the perspective of the Martinist tradition, of which Willermoz is a key past master. The Martinist tradition is a sovereign, independent collection of esoteric rites and does not constitute a Masonic organization, neither regular, irregular, or clandestine. With that being said, before we start, if you are not familiar with the various outlets to find more information about the Martinist tradition, and specifically the Ordre Martinist Souverains, or the OMS, navigate over to YouTube, youtube.com/c/Ordre Martinist Souverains, or just type in Ordre Martinist Souverains, click the subscribe button, and you'll get access to our videos as soon as they're uploaded. We are constantly making new material, and there's already something like more than 40 hours available on YouTube. Also navigate over to the Ordre Martinist Souverains Facebook page, facebook.com/martinismnet. This is the best way to see our new posts, see the new translations, publications, and releases that we are constantly producing for the esoteric community. Also, if you are interested in joining the Martinist tradition, and specifically the Ordre Martinist Souverains branch, navigate to our private Facebook group, Martinism, Aspirants to OMS, facebook.com/groups/Martinism. This group is purely for those individuals who are seeking initiation within the Ordre Martinist Souverains. It is a place for them to talk about their experiences, their challenges with the pre-associate operation and the application process, and the preliminary meditations and exercises required in order to join the order. Lastly, bookmark martinism.net, our primary website. Under Education and Curriculum, there is a wealth of material, including a folder of public documents containing all the information you need to find out more about our tradition, the application, and the required pre-associate operation. And with that, let us begin.
So again, thank you all for being here today. The purpose of tonight's talk is to speak about chivalric orders in early Freemasonry. Specifically, we're going to deal with knightly inspired orders from the 1750s through 1790s, essentially, 1800s, which saw a certain downtick for a period and then popped back up. We're going to talk about how those have, how they came to being, what their principal symbols and teachings were, and how it differs from the kinds of teachings we receive now in our mainstream Blue Lodges, and some of the challenges that have faced these rites in the modern day, specifically political challenges that continue to occur within these rites. So with that, we'll just get right into things. Hopefully all my screens are working right. So before entering upon any great and laudable undertaking, we should first invoke the aid of deity. So assume an attitude of prayer and bow your head. Get your breath going in through your nose, out through your mouth. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, who are one and three, let us invoke Almighty God. O you, eternal creator, unique and infinite principle of all beings, you have made Adam in your own image, endowing him with intelligence to know and admire the works of your wisdom. You have, in your likeness, given him the means to manifest his desires. Spread a ray of your divine light over the men gathered here who seek you with sincerity, and all who burn with a strong and pure desire to know their origin, their destination, and the means that your infinite goodness has reserved, so that, enlightened by you in what we must believe and practice, we we can act without ceasing for your greater glory, for our true happiness, and for that of our fellows. We conjure you by your own nature, O Almighty God, restore the man your image in his first rites, as much as he can be here below. Give him the strength to fight effectively against your enemies and his own. Finally, let us, guided and supported by all the powers that you have gathered around him, may we all come to the fullness of the light and your presence in the immensity of your glory. Amen, 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 amen. The prayer comes from the 5th to 8th degrees of Jean-Baptiste Willermoz, Chevaliers Bienfaisants de la Cité Sainte, which we will talk about in depth tonight. Opening with a quote from illustrious Brent Morris on the high degrees. In a lecture, The Royal Secret in the U.S. before 1801, he says, "The first 3 degrees are only a preparation for the higher degrees. The first 3, or blue degrees, were formed as a test of character or capacity of the initiated before they should be admitted into the knowledge of more important mysteries." And we will see tonight how the degrees we are talking about use the first degrees as a sort of test of character. Truly is just a preparation, and the work only truly begins after the 3rd degree. Some key chivalric orders we're going to consider tonight are namely these various chivalric branches that flourished in the mid-1700s, and whose legacy is still seen today in the various high grades of Freemasonry. These early systems reveal a rich heritage of esotericism, chivalry, and mysticism in some of the earliest high grades. A richness plagued by political struggles for the Scottish and French systems, by the domination of English rights, a struggle inextricably tied to the Jacobite movement and a struggle for sovereignty and independence from foreign rule. We will preface tonight with a brief history, of course very brief, of the Knights Templar, because that could be an entire thesis, and there are many books on that already, and introduce key political figures in the development of the early high grades. We will then explore the Rite of Strict Observance and their heretical interpretation of the Masonic myth, their origins, downfall, and resurrection under Jean-Baptiste Willermoz's Rectified Scottish Rite and C.B.C.S. And lastly, we will review their modern legacy and continued political struggles with English rights. So those in bold are some of the primary organizations we will cover. Those not in bold are definitely involved in this narration, and we might touch on them just a little bit. Know that we could expand greatly upon each one of those, but for the sake of time, those are our 3 primary currents. Know that for this talk, I relied as much as possible on primary Masonic sources, such as ancient rituals and lectures of these orders, and secondary Masonic publications, such as papers of the Quater Coronati, Scottish Rite Research Society, and other Masonic publications. From the late 20th century today, many popular books have been published on the Templars, their myths, and supposed treasures, but I did not consider these reputable sources. In tonight's talk, I'll do my best to discern between historical fact and initiatory legend or mythology by identifying these legends as such. I don't believe that we should necessarily throw the legends out with the bathwater. I think that there can be a lot to learn from them, not just for the context of these individuals going through the systems, but for perhaps some overarching mythologies, prototypes, archetypes that they're trying to express to us that have meaning for the human condition. In the chat, it seems like some people are stuck waiting in the lobby. I'm sure Joe can handle all that. And thank you for handling that, Brother Joe. So due to the nature of its vast influence in Romantic legend and Masonic ritual, we'll begin with a brief introduction of the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The Pauper Comilitons Christi Templique Solomonici, called also the Order of the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, the Order of Solomon's Temple, Knights Templar, or simply the Templars. Here we will recount a brief summary of the order's history and begin to fill in the so-called secret or esoteric history passed down through the Masonic chivalric orders, such as the Strict Observance, the C.B.C.S, and other rites. So most of their origin stories begin with the initial 9 knights and their arrival in the Holy Land in 1108. They were said to have been founded for the purpose of protecting pilgrims on the road to the Holy Land. But interestingly, there was little evidence of this in their early years, though the Knights Hospitaller, the actual Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, who became eventually the Knights of Malta, were in fact already providing this service. In 1115, they received quarter from King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, adjacent to the Dome of the Rock, or Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was in turn built upon the ruins of the Second Temple of Jerusalem, which was in turn destroyed by the Romans in AD 70 during the Jewish uprising, and was built upon the ruins of King Solomon's Temple. These highly significant headquarters are an important element in their Templar legends that recount knights excavating the temple ruins. Some mythical legends state that in their first 9 years, they discovered vaults and crypts of the original temple, treasures ranging from gold and jewels to relics of the true cross, perhaps the Holy Grail, the Sphere of Destiny, or even the head of St. John the Baptist. Legends abound. Circa 1120 AD, St. Bernard of Clairvaux wrote his Book to the Knights of the Temple in praise of the new knighthood. This document praised the Templars' new form of spiritual knighthood and monastic warriorship. This is the original letter to the Pope asking to grant the Templars status as an official knightly branch of the Church. Under St. Bernard's stewardship, the primitive rule, or governing document of the order, was established by the Council of Troy in 1128. From thence, a series of papal bulls gradually added power and strength to the order. Pope Innocent II's papal bull, Omne Datum Optimum, gave the Templars absolute sovereignty through papal protection, and hereafter they were answerable only to the Pope himself. It also promised the Templars all spoils in their Muslim conquests and gave exemption from tithes and taxes. This and future bulls established their right to build their own churches and their own estates throughout Christendom. As we know, the Templars also created the world's first international banking system, by which pilgrims were able to deposit money in Europe, receive a check or receipt for the same, and withdraw their funds once they arrived safely in Jerusalem. The fees from this service added greatly to the knights' wealth and prestige. The order flourished throughout the Holy Land and Europe until their eventual demise in 1307 due to a political and financial coup. That image on the right is said to be an image of St. Bernard praising the knights. On the right, we have an image of King Philip the Fair of France. King Philip IV of France, also known as King Philip the Fair, was an ambitious king who also had essentially bankrupted his kingdom. One legend recounts King Philip IV being chased by a mob, angry for devaluing their currency. He hid inside a Templar church and there saw, with his own eyes, according to this legend, the massive wealth and treasure of the Templars, and began his plan to overthrow the order and claim their wealth as his own. As the Templars were under the direct protection of the papacy, King Philip IV first had to manipulate Pope Clement V. The Pope was essentially powerless at this time in history, and had already been sequestered by King Philip, and for the first time ever, the Pope was prevented from returning to Rome. Histories recount that the king influenced the Pope to sign arrest warrants, which were then distributed throughout France. All these secret warrants are to be opened at the same time and contain orders to arrest the Templars at dawn on Friday, October 13th, 1307. Demolay was previously summoned to France by Pope Clement V to discuss merging the Templars and the Hospitallers, a proposition to which neither order was amenable. Despite the quick arrest of 139 knights, apparently no treasure was found, and the entire naval fleet of the Templars had disappeared in the night. Numerous legends, both Masonic and general, attempt to account for this. Tales exist of the Templars fleeing to Scotland and Portugal for refuge. One legend even accounts their fleeing to England. Whatever the truth, a month later, on November 22nd, 1307, Pope Clement V issued the papal bull Pastoralis Preeminentia, which instructed Christian monarchs across Europe to arrest the Templars and seize all their assets. The famous Templar trials ensued, and the knights were coerced through brutal torture, including the rack and burning, to confess to a range of crimes. These confessions ranged from idolatry, sodomy, to witchcraft and heresy. Templars confessed under pain of torture to spitting on the cross, denying the divinity of Jesus, homosexual acts of sodomy, financial corruption, fraud, and secrecy. Forms of idolatry they were accused of included, get this, worshiping a cat or even kissing a cat beneath its tail, worship of a severed head, which sometimes was described as a silver head, a gold head, a skull, with or without feet, sometimes named Baphomet. This accusation causes some speculators to consider if the Templars were actually Johannites, worshipping the head of St. John the Baptist as the true Messiah. Links to the Johannite tradition indeed abound in the cult, from mainstream Blue Lodge Masonry claiming to be Knights of the Holy Saints John of Jerusalem, to Pasquale's Elocoan, and Martinist evocations of St. John on the solstices, using a skull and a severed head. Interestingly, the actual Knights of St. John of Jerusalem were the Hospitallers, a quasi-enemy of the Templars, to whom the Templar assets were given in 1312 when the Council of Vienne officially dissolved the order through a series of papal bulls, including Vox in Excelso and Ad Providam. And on there on the left, you see an image of St. John the Baptist's head. On the right, you see the much popularized image of Baphomet, supposedly occurring in initiation of the Grand Ecosse of St. Andrew. Obviously, that is a hoax, but quite an interesting image that has definitely influenced the public portrayal of Masonry and certain occult ideas ever since. In September 2001, the Chinon parchment, dated 17 to 20 August 1308, was discovered in the Vatican Secret Archives by Barbara Frail, after apparently being filed in the wrong place in 1628. It is a record of the trial of the Templars and shows that Pope Clement V absolved the Templars of all heresies in 1308, only 1 year after their arrest. A second Chinon parchment was also found, addressed to King Philip IV, which stated that all Templars who had confessed to heresy were restored to the sacraments and to the unity of the Church, end quote. The discovery of these absolutions just makes the sad demise of the Templar order all the more tragic. So that is a very brief overview, just for those who might not have had much of a history of the Templar order. And let's jump now into 1736. Chevalier Ramsay was born in Scotland and educated at Edinburgh University. In London, he joined the Philadelphians, who studied the theosophical philosophy of Jacob Boehme's writings, of whom Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin called his second master. Ramsay later relocated to France and became intimately connected with the Jacobite movement, and he personally tutored Prince Charles Edward Stuart, or Bonnie Prince Charlie. Without a doubt, his Jacobite connections influenced his famous oration given on December 26, 1736. This oration placed the origin of Freemasonry with Crusader knights, who in turn had supposedly received ancient biblical knowledge while in Jerusalem, as well as a knowledge of Egyptian and Greek mystery traditions. Regarding the political climate at the time, remember that Anderson's constitutions of 1723 had essentially de-Christianized Masonry under UGLE. Or underneath, I guess UGLE wasn't there yet, but under that, the Grand Lodge at the time. Ramsay instead highly emphasized the importance of Scotland in the founding of Freemasonry and asserted that the French chivalric revival was a return to the true Christian Freemasonry of the Crusader Knights. Note, however, that Ramsay did not ever specifically name the Templars themselves, but rather spoke of Crusader Knights and the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, a term which actually applied to the Knights Hospitaller, as we said earlier, with whom the Templars did not always have the greatest relations. Ramsay suggests that crusading, quote, knights, princes, and nobles, when they returned from Palestine into their native dominions, established lodges, end quote. Ramsay goes on to assert that, quote, James, Lord Steward of Scotland, was the Grand Master of a lodge established at Kilwinning, in the west of Scotland, in the year 1236, end quote. This is one of the origins of the Rose Croix of Kilwinning degree, which has found its way into the modern Royal Order of Scotland, and which Robert Ambalan later uses in his Martinist Rose Croix degrees. Ramsay's oration gave credibility and glamour to the Jacobite movement, despite its historical validity or not, within French Freemasonry, and he helped to pave the way for the so-called Rite of Clermont, of which Ramsay is said to have helped write, as well as the German and later French Strict Observance of Baron von Hund, and of course then Willermoz and everything beyond that. Soon in this talk, we're going to compare the systems of Blue Lodge York Masonry with the German SO, which performed the evolutionary brid in mid-1700s Germany and France, and resulted in the crown jewel of the French R.E.R. and C.B.C.S. rituals. Let's jump into some of the legends circulated in the 1700s, specifically those of the Strict Observance. This is the first major order we're going to discover in depth, and then we'll give some background as to some of the formulation, then we'll go deep into their symbols and rituals. So, returning to the myths of the Knights Templar, we're jumping truly now into the mythological aspects, according to Masonic legend. And yes, Baron von Hund, depending on who you're talking to and which era of Masonic history you're looking at, if you're seeing an English, a French, a Scandinavian, or a German Rite, it can be spelled a variety of ways. Now that we've given a brief count of that, let's jump into the SO. So the Strict Observance has this strange legend of two Templar knights who seem to have betrayed their sub-prior. So here you're going to see an alternate version of the Masonic myth we normally deal with. The sub-prior was murdered by 3 blows of a warhammer, the last blow upon the forehead striking him dead. Later in the Inner Order's Succincta Historia Ordinis, the sub-prior is named as Carolus of Montcarmel, commander of the province on the Po and Tiber. The 2 treacherous knights are later identified as Nofade and Skene de Florian. After striking him dead with a warhammer, they hastily threw the body out of a window, dragged it to a hedge, and covered it with shrubs and stones before fleeing the scene. The legend says that they went directly to Paris and began accusing their previous order, the Templars, of heinous crimes such as blasphemy, idolatry, and heresy. This legend or version of the story places the blame for the order upon these treacherous knights and then the king or pope. Of these treacherous knights, one is said to have been caught by the order and put to death by strangulation. We'll return to that symbol later. There is some historical evidence of crimes of an ousted Templar in other sources, but none as detailed and obviously Masonic as this legend. Because of this event, the legends given here says that Jacques de Molay was arrested on October 13, 1307. So the SO placed it directly upon traitorous knights. Legend continues with a detailed account of Pierre or Peter, again, depending if you're French or English writing, fleeing to Scotland. In Masonic fashion, the Strict Observance stated he disguised himself as a Mason and went by the name Ma Beignac. The significance of this name will immediately be recognized by continental European Masons, maybe not quite as obvious to American Masons. Aumont is said to have been elected Grand Master of the Order, and the so-called secret chain of initiation begins, the secret lineage, so-called, of the Grand Masters of the Templars. There are many, many versions of these so-called secret lineages, but we're going to restrict ourselves purely to that which is relevant to the Strict Observance. In this rite, they claim that Pierre Aumont preserved the Templar tradition in secret within the stonemasons in the future Masonic order, but dared not to confer the Scots or knightly degrees beyond 3rd degree Master Mason until the resurrection of the order as a Strict Observance, and later the C.B.C.S. So again, Karl Gotthelf Again, I don't speak German at all, so I cannot pronounce that. French is my gig, Hebrew, a little bit of Latin. But Karl Gotthelf, Baron von Hund und Alten Grotkau, or something like that. The Templar Strict Observance, or simply the SO, was founded in 1751 as a Masonic rite claiming direct lineage and succession to the Knights Templar, as well as secret knowledge passed down by its unknown superiors. Founded by Karl Gotthelf, this dude with the long German name, which I, again, am not going to try to pronounce. The order's name had the double meaning of following strictly the rules of the order, as well as distinguishing itself from the then current German Freemasonry. Masonic scholar Alan Bernheim asserts that, quote, von Hund was made a Mason at Frankfurt am Main, 20th of March, 1742. Yet other accounts say that von Hund was initiated in France into a Templar degree in 1743. Von Hund himself later claimed that he was initiated in Paris by a Jacobite Scottish knight into the Order of the Knights Templar, and he says he was either initiated by or introduced to Prince Charles Edward Stuart, the young pretender, the young Chevalier, Bonnie Prince Charles. It is upon these supposed initiations and links that von Hund founded his rite of strict observance. Bonnie Prince Charles was the grandson of James II, King of England and Ireland, also known as James VII, King of Scotland from 1685 until the Glorious Revolution of 1688. At this time, with the fall of the last Roman Catholic King of England, Scotland, and Ireland, the Jacobite movement began with the goal of restoring the House of Stuart and Catholicism to the British throne. After the fall of the Stuart kings in 1688, King James II, together with Scottish knights, fled to France for safety. They found refuge in Masonic lodges and fostered a Scottish or Écossais Freemasonry that was distinct and independent from the rule of King William III, the Hanoverians, and the later United Grand Lodge of England. The Counter-Enlightenment in France sought to inculcate a chivalric, Christian foundation of Freemasonry that was inextricably tied to the Jacobite movement. This Jacobite or Stuart Masonry not only held political implications that were notoriously anti-English, but also found root in any people who felt their sovereignty and rights were thwarted by outside rulers. Templar Haute-Grades, such as the various Zerubbabel degrees, were spiritually and romantically inspired, but also served as political statements against the British monarchy under Hanoverian rule. Some accounts even say that Bonnie Prince Charles was in fact the original head of the Strict Observance. He had a vast Masonic record, and we will briefly explore two key individuals that he influenced, both of which are responsible for multiple strings of Masonic esotericism from the 1700s to today. One is another real long name, Jacques de Livron. Actually, I didn't even say the whole thing there. Jacques de Livron Joachim de la Tour de la Casse Martin de Pasquale, the Masonic magician, who founded the Martinist Rite, now Martinist Rite, of the Eloquent, L'Ordre des Chevaliers Masons Eloquents de l'Univers, which fully means the Order of the Knights Masons Elect Priests of the Universe. What a title. It's truly humble, right? He received his Masonic patent. His father received a Masonic patent from Prince Bonnie Charles. This patent granted by Charles Edward Stuart as, quote, King of Scotland, Ireland, and England, master of all the lodges spread over the surface of the earth, again, very humble, was given to Pasquale's father and allowed him the right as Grand Master to constitute and run lodges and temples to the glory of the Grand Architect of the universe, as well as the ability to transmit the patent to his heir, Martin. Pasquale's rite utilized teachings and techniques of classical ceremonial magic, Hebrew Kabbalah, Christian mysticism, and classical theosophy, not to be confused with Blavatsky, but more the theosophy of Boehme, to lead the candidate in a very individual and visceral path of initiation, with the goal of personally experiencing the divine unity through personal rituals work prescribed for each grade. Key pupils of this order include Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, of whom the much later Martinist Order is inspired and named after. Jean-Baptiste Willermoz, who revised the SO into the Rite Écossais Rectified, the first Scottish Rite, Rectified Scottish Rite, C.B.C.S., and numerous other Masonic authorities who helped to influence the 1782 Masonic Convention of Wilhelmsbad. Another key individual related to Bonnie Charles is that of Charles XIII, who ruled as King of Sweden from 1809 and King of Norway from 1814 to his death. His contributions to the survival of European Masonic esotericism can definitely not be overstated. His older brother, King Gustav III, was initiated into the Royal and Noble Order of the Thistle, the Order of St. Andrew, by the Jacobite Bonnie Prince Charles himself, and was named his successor as Grand Master of the Holy Order of Our Lord Jesus Christ Temple on December 8th, 1743. This became an important Jacobite link to Swedish and Haute-Grades Freemasonry. King Charles himself was an adept of the Asiatic Brethren, a magical Masonic order that taught Kabbalistic ceremonial magic. On Facebook, you might have seen some individuals poring over magical journals on a recent trip to the Grand Lodge of Sweden. Those documents, such as the Magia Divina, such as his personal Brahman ritual, his handbooks from the Asiatic Brethren, the Golden Rosenkreuz, are still in possession of the Grand Lodge of Sweden, and some of them have finally been approved to be published publicly after 5 years of being translated, done, and waiting. So hopefully in 2020, we'll see some of those come out publicly for all kinds of people to be able to have access to now. And it truly shows this magical form of Freemasonry permeated Scandinavia in the 1700s, and you can definitely see that influence today in their modern Swedish Rite, as well as other rites that they carry in secret. Specifically, the Magia Divina was approved to be published, so that'll be coming out soon. So this guy, King Charles XIII, served as Grand Master of the Strict Observance from 1777 to 1781, just before its complete dissolution and integration into Willermoz's new R.E.R. or C.B.C.S. He served as Grand Master of the Swedish Rite and made 2 major revisions of its 11-degree system, integrating the magical and spiritual philosophy of his previous groups into his most beautiful Masonic rite, the Swedish Rite. In 1811, he established the Order of Charles XIII, which can never have more than 33 members at the same time. This order utilizes the same collar and jewel as that of Willermoz's C.B.C.S. You can see an example of that around his neck. And his legacy lives on through the Swedish Rite and the esoteric lineages he carried, which are still passed down today in Sweden. So returning to our first major, C.B.C.S. jewel, yeah. Our first major rite we're going to dive into in depth, Baron von Hund's Rite of the Strict Observance. So again, like we said, it claimed direct succession to the old Templars, and they sought to reform Freemasonry and replace its esoteric focus with a strict discipline and functionality, yet they still practiced laboratory alchemy in the highest degrees. As we've talked upon, it contained a hidden Jacobite symbolism, which was politically motivated against the English Grand Lodge. After the death of von Hund, Duke Charles became its leader until Willermoz revised it in 1782. So the Strict Observance was composed of this set of degrees, divided into a couple different classes. So the usual craft degrees of apprentice, fellow, and master. A Scots Master, 4th degree, which we'll see became the common thing from here out. A inner order of chivalric degrees, secular novice and knight. You'll see that repeat again. And then a clerical degree. This is an example of a St. John's Lodge. This is kept in the archives of the Grand Lodge of Sweden. And we're now going to summarize the Strict Observance's heretical reinterpretation of the Masonic degrees, their mythology and symbols, specifically those of the craft degrees. As the candidate ventured through the 3 craft degrees, they were unaware of the hidden Templar and Jacobite symbolism, And they were given essentially the usual craft interpretations that we receive today. It would seem rather similar. Upon acceptance within the inner order, specifically the 5th and 6th degrees, the tracing boards and symbols and passwords and all those things from the craft degrees were reintroduced, and what they considered the profane Masonic veil was torn away to reveal a striking story of Templar symbolism. So the 1st degree of apprentice. On the left, you see a tracing board. I was unable to find one of them, but luckily, like in most of the French degrees, the 1st and 2nd degree tracing boards are pretty darn similar, very minor changes, so this can serve for both of them. We're going to dissect that tracing board on the left. So at the top, we're familiar with what these symbols mean essentially in our Blue Lodges, in American/York Masonry, but let's see what they meant in this German strict observance, which went French. The 9 stars at the top of the tracing board, formed in an X, or a St. Andrew's cross, are made to represent the original 9 founders of the order, meaning the Templars, those original 9 knights we discovered, right? It is not stated here, but can be inferred that the St. Andrew's cross is also a reference to the legends given in the initiation of the Royal Order of Scotland, said to have been founded by Robert the Bruce, in their mythology at least, after 63 Knights Templar assisted him to defeat the English at the Battle of Bannockburn. Again, that's another initiatory history, magical or romantic history, which we see come up again and again from here out. The cordelier, or bond of friendship, signifies the cord received at the admission to the inner order. This later links to the Martinist cordelier and chain of union, which in turn directly links to the traditional Templar regalia. The usual indented tessel around the board is made into a lattice to signify the separation of the order from the profane world. This feature is later missing in the R.E.R. division. The usual Masonic working tools are now made to represent Aumont, Pierre or Peter Aumonts, hiding within the stonemasons. And I guess I didn't write this part. You see also in the pillars, the J and the B come to represent Jacques or Jacobus Burgundicus, or the first Grand Master of the Knights Templar. And we later see in other parts of the ritual, JBMB, Jacobus Burgundicus Molay Bustus, Jacques de Molay of Burgundy, burnt. So they're planting this symbolism exactly, which we still see all over the place. We're seeing that symbolism be brought up in different ways, and we'll return to that later. Another feature of the strict observance is that each degree has a specific emblem, a special emblem. And these same emblems pass on into the R.E.R. or C.B.C.S. of Willermoz. For the 1st degree apprentice, the emblem was called Ad hoc Stat. This represents that the order, though destroyed and pillaged by King Philip the Fair, still remains and is propagated in secret. This symbol and meaning are the same in Willermoz's revision. Regarding the 1st degree initiation itself, the candidate enters partially clothed, as we know, but here that's made to represent the poor knights in need of the regalia of the order. The divesting of metals signifies the pillaging of the order's assets by King Philip. The 3 circumambulations are made to represent the 3 expeditions into the Holy Land, required before being accepted as a knight. The 3 knocks given upon the breast of the candidate with the compasses refer to the knight's dubbing with the sword. That's a feature we're not used to in American Masonry. You see it in most other rites, though, is that a tool of some sort, depending on the rite, depending on the degree, will be placed upon a certain part of your breast, depending on the degree again, and the master will knock with his gavel upon it with various types of knocks, again, according to degrees. And yeah, all the best degrees use that. Whether it's a blade, like a sword, you might see a square, you might see the compass on one part of the breast or the full part of the breast. For example, the master would have it from left to right breast, and you'd knock whatever the knock is of that rite upon the breast. It's quite an interesting symbol. We'll return to that again when we get to the C.B.C.S., how they use that in their rituals. The white aprons represent the simple tunic of the novitiate, a plain white robe, and the women's gloves represent the permission to marry once the order was dissolved. Lastly, the 3 years of age refer to the 3 years of probation within the novitiate. And again, we don't have ages in our degrees, right? When you come into this degree, the candidate is said to be 3 years of age. We don't do that in American Masonry. Lastly, the return of the sword and the hat, which was taken at the beginning when they came into the antechamber, referred to the presentation of the sword and helmet at the knight's dubbing. The first degree catechism is likewise reinterpreted in light of Templar symbolism. Interestingly, like we said a couple times already, the order is said to be under the patronage of St. John the Baptist, on whose day Pierre Aumont supposedly held the first secret chapter of the order after the order's destruction. In the SO, the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, another name of the Hospitallers, are correctly and distinctly separated from the Knights Templar. So they actually do correctly distinguish the names, whereas many other writers have not done so. Again, the tracing board is the same right now, but it's pretty darn close, okay? This is actually the proper second degree tracing board. So moving to the second degree of companion or fellow, depending on who we're talking to, symbols such as the ashlars are made now to represent the history of the order. The rough ashlar on the bottom left, those rough stones, represent the 10 or 12 years of difficult and poor beginnings of the Templars. In the center, the smooth or perfect ashlar represents the 177 years of the order's fortune, whereas in the right, the broken or split stone represents the 106 years of difficulty after losing the Holy Land to Saladin, as well as the cruelties of the king and pope from 1307 to 1313. So just take a moment to check out those stones and see how that represents those 3 stages. Which you can also definitely infer alchemical meanings in the higher grades or an ERO process that is occurring. Whereas at the top, the letter G in the blazing star are made to represent the canonicate, founded upon the law of Gottfried G. von Bouillon in 1099. That's not the most inventive way of reinterpreting that, but that's one way they reinterpreted it. Lastly, the emblem of this degree is dirigit obliqua, which literally means he makes the crooked straight. This represents the efforts to revive the order under the mask of Freemasonry. Again, that's the whole myth of Pierre Aumont, is that he hid himself within the stonemasons and secretly brought this Templar lineage and teaching into Freemasonry. And their idea of the strict observance is that they are reviving Masonry to its actual true origins. The second degree password is now made to represent the flight and destruction of the order under King Philip the Fair, i.e. certain people won't understand the password, understand the pronunciation, so it helps you to discern enemy from friend. So jumping into the third degree master, this is when things start getting really, really interesting. The third degree master tracing board, and you all can visualize a general master's tracing board. I wasn't able to find a specific SO one, so I'm not going to claim it, but we're looking at a grave, right? So visualize what I say in your mind. It takes on new meaning. The coffin now is not actually of Jacques de Molay like you would think, who was burned at the stake, but they say it is that of Carolus Amont Carmal. He was the commander of the province in the Po and Tiber, the sub-prior we talked about earlier, who was slain by the traitorous knights Nofede and Skene de Florian. He was that sub-prior murdered, which obviously has a heramic theme to it. The 61 flames around him signify the 59 Templars burned in one day on the field of St. Anthony, as well as J.B.M., Jacobus Burgundus de Molay, and Guy, who burned slowly at the stake. So those 2 plus 59 equal the 61 flames. Here in that diagram, the letters MB are not made to represent the earlier May-Benak or Ma-Beignac, which we heard earlier as the masked name of Aumont, but rather the MB are now said to represent Molay Burgundis. So they keep using these symbols in different ways, right? And I'm fascinated with just the way that they were able to extract this Templar mythology out of it that fit really darn well, actually, you know, which we of course know is very romantic and idealistic and fanciful, but hopefully by the end of this talk we'll see why there's value in it and inspiration by remembering these symbols. The third degree Master Temple itself was also draped in black, as we see in early Scottish Rite degrees, in mourning of JBM and careless Monte Carmel, who they considered the true Hiram of the Strict Observance. The story recounts the legend of the murder of Careless. The raising of the slain body now represents the resurrection of the Order under Aumont when he fled and resurrected it under the Masons. Hence, the Master's word now represents his hidden and assumed identity. When given the sword, the candidate is told, quote, use it to punish traitors. So what a trip. You go through it in the usual way, and then after you get to the inner order, they re-explain that we've actually been this whole time trying to subtly initiate you into Templar mysteries. On the left is the symbol, the emblem of the third degree master, in silentio et spe fortitudo mea. Some versions have that spelling slightly altered. In hope or the order of the words, in hope and silence is my strength. This is also again used in the R.E.R. of Willermoz and represents the destruction of the order. You see that it is a ship without rudder, without mast, broken, drifting on the sea, aimlessly. This is meant to represent just the sad state of the order after King Philip the Fair and Pope Clement V basically essentially successfully couped the Templars. And it's a fitting symbol for the master's degree and the mourning that it goes on that degree, despite which version of the mythology we're using. Interestingly, however, even with this symbol of a ship at sea, the Strict Observance lecture does not actually mention the missing Templar navy, which disappeared the morning of October 13th, 1307. I think that's quite interesting they didn't use that. Yes, spes mea in Deo est. Definitely the essential same thing there. Jumping into their second class of degrees, if we're going to call it that, their fourth degree Scots Master degree. On the left is the tracing board for that degree. This represents the resurrection of the Order under Aumont. Though this grade acts as a capstone to the craft degrees, it is still tied to the symbolism of the first to third degree symbolic lodge. The resurrection of Hiram, or rather of Careless de Montcarmel, foreshadows a similar tracing board and the sign of the R.E.R. fourth degree Scottish Master of St. Andrew, which we'll see in a little bit. The green drapings in this degree, like the fourth degree emblem, which you'll see in a moment, Meliora Presumo, which means I foresee better things or I look to better things, they both symbolize hope in the future, a future in which the sword of war, the lion of the tribe of Judah, are exchanged for the Masonic working tools, which you see the lion now playing with, and aided by the virtues of the four animals around the coffin. This degree also represents the Order's revenge upon the traitorous Nofede and Skene de Florian, who were executed by strangulation in the mythology. The word Notuma, which is often written as Noctuma because somehow a typo crept in, Notuma is a permutation of Aumont. So again, on the left you see the tomb, Careless Aumont Carmel. Obviously it has some links to JBM as well. The virtues of the four animals, and the lion evolving from a state of warfare like that of Zerubbabel to that of Freemasonry. And yes, for sure, these diagrams, these images around the coffin, they definitely have to have some kind of a link to the tarot because of the way that the universe card is represented with the cherubim, the fixed signs of the zodiac, which in traditional Catholicism, not just occultism, in traditional Catholicism, those cherubim represent the gospel writers, right? And we see that in the Scottish Rite, in Freemasonry, in occultism, Kabbalah, in just everything. So it's very interesting that this image from the 1750s links to the tarot as well. The working tool is replacing the key in the lion's mouth. They don't use the key in the lion's mouth in this degree in this version, but there's definitely a link there between those two symbols, which we just talked about last Legion. Yes, sir. So again, that is the capstone of the craft degrees, right? Now we move into the true inner order of 5th and 6th degree, novice. The 5th degree novitiate discourse begins the transition from the symbolic and Haute-Grades Freemasonry of the 4th degree into the Strict Observance's Templar inner order of the 5th and up. Here the novice is inculcated with strict obedience or strict observance to the unknown superiors of the order. And this is a term we see come up again and again and again in esoteric masonry, in occultism, from here out, is this conception of unknown superiors. It's not new. This conception goes back to at least 1643, if not 1643 with Les Philosophes Inconnus, 1614 with the Fama Fraternitatis, and definitely before that with other traditions that just didn't use that name. But here, this name, unknown superior, really becomes a key term from here out. So, here also begins the tale of the Templar legend of knights, escaping persecution in France by fleeing to Scotland in the order's mythology, disguised as Masons. This legend also ties in with that recounted in the initiation of the Royal Order of Scotland, namely, that supposedly King Robert the Bruce, 1274 to 1329, founded the order to commemorate the assistance of the Templars at the Battle of Bannockburn. That history states that 63 Knights Templar unexpectedly arrived and helped Robert the Bruce to defeat the English army of Edward II. Factually, we know that this battle was pivotal in the War for Scottish Independence, which remained sovereign until the Union of 1707. And that obviously occurred after the removal of the Stuarts from the throne. Mackey references Thorey's Acta Latimorum in his telling of the story, and he states that Robert the Bruce, quote, reserved for himself and his successors the title of Grand Master and founded at Kilwinning the Grand Lodge of the Royal Order of Herodom. Mackey, however, goes on to state that, quote, the Order of the Knights of St. Andrew, or the Thistle, was not created by Robert the Bruce in 1314, but by James II in 1440. End quote. Today, there are numerous various origin stories that exist, ranging from Robert the Bruce in 1314, James II in 1440, James V in 1540. There's all different kinds of versions out there, depending on who you're talking to. We do know that in 1687, James II issued a patent, quote, reviving and restoring the Order of the Thistle to its full glory, luster, and magnificency, end quote. So whatever the historical truth, which I'm not going to try to tell you what it is, and despite firm assertions from writers such as Mackey, Waite, and Gregory Speth of the invalidity of the Jacobite Templar connections, this specific Templar legend of the Battle of Bannockburn became key in Romantic and Masonic legend. Yes, and we'll get to that aspect with the Strict Observance in a moment. In the 6th Degree Knight, they fully unveil the Templar meanings of the Strict Observance, Masonic symbols and myths, and a full account of the history of that order is given from the original Templars to their resurrection under the strict observance. So all the things I've told you so far in the slides are the 6 degrees interpretation of the craft degrees. Again, going through it, you would only see it as the symbols would generally be interpreted pretty similar to how they are today for us in a York American degree. But at the 6th degree, they finally unveil the full meaning of it. And you'll see that this pattern of veiling and unveiling in the 6th degree continues in future rites. As seen from this lodge diagram of a secret alchemical grade of the SO, the highest initiates practiced, indeed, laboratory alchemy, despite sometimes saying they didn't. This diagram comes from the archives of the Grand Lodge of Sweden. Recall that King Charles XIII was one of the last Grand Masters of the SO, and a wealth of unpublished information, not only in this order, but also the Kabbalistic Masonic Order of the Asiatic Brethren, the Alchemical Order of the Golden Rosenkreuz, and an even more secret organization of the Delu, which brings together the remnants of all these groups in 1792, around the time of French Revolution. Those things are also there as well. So, strict observance. Let's see now how our last principal figure, Jean-Baptiste Willermoz, the great Masonic reformer of the late 18th century, took this and ran with it. So Willermoz received his first initiation, Masonic initiation, at 20 years of age, and he became venerable master of his lodge by 22. He was deeply involved in masonry the rest of his life, and his career truly is vast. By 23, he was founding new lodges. By 32, he was serving as provincial Grand Master under the direction of the Grand Lodge of France. By 33, he was founding the alchemical Masonic order, Souverains Chapeau des Chevaliers de l'Aiguille Rose-Croix, which is the sovereign chapter of Knights of the Black Eagle Rose-Croix. This was a Masonic organization devoted to alchemical research. He looks so sweet there, right? It's like a glamour shot. Despite his early honors, the pivotal experience of his Masonic initiatory journey occurred in May 1767, when he was initiated into Martinist de Pasquale's L'Ordre des Chevaliers Maison le Coin de l'Univers, the Elocoan, by the Grand Sovereign Pasquale himself. Robert Ambulan recounts that Willermoz was not as mystically or magically gifted as his brothers, but that he was encouraged on by the example and motivation of Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin and his brothers. By May 1768, he was admitted to the highest degree of Rocroi and served as a superior judge on the sovereign tribunal or grand council of that order. He remained a Cohen his entire life, wrote numerous philosophical treatises upon that system, and we will come to see it influenced all his future work in mainstream Freemasonry. This is an image of the heading or the top of Willermoz's Elocoan patent, dated 1767. And we can see here that we're definitely way off the reservation when it comes to mainstream Masonry like we're given in our York degrees here in America. Without spending too much time on this, because we could and should have talks just on this. Maybe, but not really. In the center, this is one of the main sigils of the Elocoan. Yeah, definitely. And that's a different talk. This is essentially the fully explained sigil of the Elocoan. This symbol is unveiled throughout the degrees of the order. Different parts of it come to light. They permutate, they expand, they contract. Without revealing too much here, you have a very old version of what you could say is the Rose Cross of the Golden Dawn. The exact same symbolism is being put forth, just in a much more occulted way. You have sigils spanning from, yes, Agrippa in some ways, as far as the Saturn and Luna sigils. We have very unique sigils for the other planets, Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, as well as occulted forms of the 4 archangels in the quarters. And you have Pasquale's very unique IAO in the center, as well as his conception of the father, Abba. So this is basically a glyph of what the Eloco initiations are meant to bring you to. And again, we'll talk about this in depth another time. Right now, that's just a quick touchstone. So I don't know why there's a yellow streak on. Are y'all seeing that? I don't know. So yeah, there are some yellow streaks on there. So returning to the mainstream Chivlaric Orders, because Cohen is definitely off the reservation. Willermoz joined the Strict Observance in 1773, taking the chivalric motto, Equis ab eremo, which is so appropriate as a Martinist. Eremos is ancient Greek, and it can mean lonely, solitary, desert, or waste. As a noun, hermit, or as a verb, a retreat. So he's literally the knight of hermitage, the solitary knight, the lonely knight, the silent, unknown sentinel, which we see is very appropriate if you've ever studied those traditions. He quickly became the chancellor of the Lyons Strict Observance chapter. In 1774, he founded the Strict Observance Lodge La Bienfaisants and became chancellor of its new province, the Directory of Auvergne. Baron von Hund died in 1776 without ever naming a successor properly or revealing his secret/unknown superiors. Because of this, soon after, the Rite fell out of favor as the unknown superiors of the order and its claim to a Templar heritage came into question. You see the same thing happen, 130 years later with Blavatsky, right? You see the same thing happen with Mathers, Westcott, Woodman, and the HOGD. Interestingly, this has never been an issue in the Martinist order, which also has conceptions of unknown masters, past masters, unknown superiors, because they turn it into a much different thing, which becomes a mystical reality that the candidate experiences if they are sincere. Here, the problem was that it was in mainstream Masonry. People took it literally. They didn't see it as a mystical teaching. So, because of this, a series of Masonic conventions began to take place in which the various rites of Europe would compete essentially in who would become the new official branch of Haute-Grades Freemasonry. So, in an effort to preserve the magical and initiatory mythos of their late master Pasquale, Willermoz and his fellow Elocoan Rudolf Salzmann began to secretly implant Pasquale's teachings within the two new degrees meant to capstone the Strict Observance system. Through these two degrees, Pasquale's unique Kabbalistic mythology and cosmology and worldview from the EC would be preserved and passed on in mainstream Masonry. First, we have the 1778 convention in Lyons. And this is when Willermoz's greatest contribution to mainstream Masonry occurs. It begins to take root as he was formally elected to revise the Strict Observance. In 1778, they met and reformed the Auvergne province of the SO. Here, he began to create the Rite Equus Rectified, Rectified Scottish Rite, and drafted the rituals and governing documents that would eventually replace the Strict Observance. And this is a gross simplification that we're going to spend 30 seconds on that. This entire talk is a distillation of a 900-page book I'm working on finishing. And this section right here covers at least 100 pages. So a lot more to talk about. 1782. Following his success in Lyons, Willermoz sought to bring these innovations to the larger Masonic scene and attended the 1782 Convent of Wilhelmsbad. This convention was essentially a battle between the Haute-Grades rites of the day to determine superiority and who would eventually reign as the official Masonic rite. In attendance was Weishaupt and his Bavarian Illuminati, leaders of the Filetes, Willermoz and his R.E.R, C.B.C.S, as well as representatives of other rites, including the Golden Rosenkreuz. At the end of the proceedings, Willermoz's rite was essentially victorious, and it secured its perpetuation as a mainstream Masonic rite. Here they laid out the governing documents for the inner order, the C.B.C.S., and its rule of the 9 points. On the right, that's an image of the 1782 version of the Grade of Apprentice. But here they laid out their rule of the order in 9 points. And this is a very, very short but exquisitely beautiful document that lays out the mystical code of the C.B.C.S. It reads like this, just this fantastic, amazing legend of Rosicrucian, knightly, chivalric, almost Zen philosophy that entices one to learn more about what it is. It talks about the origin of man, his first estate, and the divine nature. It talks about the fall of man and his fall into ignorance and blindness, and the steps that he can take to come out of it. And then once he comes out of that, what his duties are to himself, to the order, to his fellow man, etc., etc. It's a fantastic rite. Hit me up if you don't have a copy of it, and we'll definitely make sure that you have an example of that. That is super rad. I would love to talk with you about that, Brother Wages, and most definitely. So again, this short document lays out the philosophy and majesty of the koan, but he does it in a way that is digestible to regular masonry. Let's see. We're an hour in. Normally I skip this one because just trying to make things fast. But this is a dating cipher. One of the things about the SO and the 1778, 1782 conventions is that, and the things we hear nowadays, are that they completely disavowed the Templar heritage and Templar claims and blah, 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 right? And they made this new rectified Scottish Rite. But that's just simply not true when you actually look at the inner order teachings of the C.B.C.S. On the outer order, i.e. the craft degrees, they definitely formally disavowed any Templar connection. They formally disavowed those teachings. They formally disavowed those symbols. But as soon as you're in the 5th degree, they return right to it again. So within this is just one example of a proof showing the cipher being used in the R.E.R. and how they slightly changed it just a tad bit so that the Templar tradition still stands ad hoc stat in plain sight. Let's take a look at that for a moment. You're probably familiar with the usual Analucas. We then show the SO's dating cipher, which they presumed Jacques died 1313. Most scholars say 1314 now, but can't imagine information moved fast back then. It shows now how you make that cipher. And then it shows how the R.E.R. made the cipher a little more simple and veiled it just slightly. All right. So that is our brief overcount of the strict observance in about 20 minutes. There's a lot of resources out there. We'll give you some slides at the end about some things you can read into deeper on those symbols. But I'm fascinated with the SO because they amazingly took what we all know and love and found or grafted or extracted this Templar Masonic myth out of it that fit pretty darn well, man. So fascinating stuff, and it came to influence Freemasonry from here out. Let's jump now into the rectified Scottish Rite of Jean-Baptiste Willermoz. So this really is properly two orders, because they are indeed separate. Now, in most Masonic jurisdictions, they're treated as one these days, but they're originally intended to be two completely separate entities. The first is the craft order, Rite Equisse Rectified, R.E.R., which means rectified Scottish Rite. They had the original 3 degrees we're familiar with, capstone by the Scottish Master St. Andrew degree. So blue masonry, green masonry. Everyone knew that green masonry existed. Okay, it formed a bridge, though. The inner order, you see below under C.B.C.S., that's short for Chevaliers Bienfaisants de la Cité Sainte, which means beneficent knights of the Holy City. Yes, yeah, in New York, definitely, they're doing a similar thing there. So the C.B.C.S. they call now a white or secret class. So you have your blue, your green, your white class, right? Those are the 5th degree and 6th degree. That was secret to even 4th degree masters. 4th degrees did not know that the 5th degree and 6th degree ever existed. In like turn, there was a double secret class, or if you're a fan of Animal House, double secret probation, double sub rosa. You have the Ordre de GP, Order of the Grand Professed, and that was the 7th and 8th degrees of Professed Knight and Grand Professed. We're going to touch on that political aspect in the very end, and they're not saying clandestine. They're saying something very different and more specific because they fucked up. So we'll hit that at the very end. And I agree with that statement too. All right, so unfortunately, so this last class was again secret, right? And it was essentially, rather than a degree, it was more of an ordination, a profession. If you've ever been a monk, then you've taken profession, right? It's a profession to a monkhood, to a knighthood, to an order. And this forms the crown jewel of 1782 French Freemasonry. And unfortunately, most R.E.R. and C.B.C.S. orders that are Masonic today in all jurisdictions don't practice these last 2 highest degrees. And this is likely due to ignorance. Yeah, administrative, but it's due to ignorance of the tradition, and they're missing the key documents. They don't understand what actually those things are meant to do and occur. So hopefully today we'll drop some bombs on that. So let's jump into the craft degrees. And remember everything we talked about the strict observance. It's going to apply here. It's going to evolve into a new thing in the C.B.C.S, in the R.E.R. more properly named. So the R.E.R. craft degrees, we'll make these pretty quick. Apprentice, companion, master, right? The first emblem on the left is the very first diagram you would see when you come into the antechamber, the chamber of reflection. No skulls in masonry, right? The first thing you'd contemplate is memento mori. Yeah, because the darkness doth comprehend it not. Exactly. You can scream it from the mountaintops. No one understands unless they're ready to receive it. So it's just funny that hashtag that some guys are doing. So that's the first thing you see. Then the next diagram is an image of the apprentice tracing board. Then you have an image in the east. Then you have the Haute-Grades you saw in the strict observance. That is the emblem as well. So these are the traditional craft degrees, but now they're subtly infused with hints of Pasquale's mythology and really of Pasquale's arithmosophy. Some of my brethren down in Brazil are working on, when they go through, down in Brazil, the R.E.R. is a completely legal, regular Masonic rite. They have 7 different types of regular rites you can go through for the craft degrees, whereas here we're stuck with 1. Unless you're in Louisiana, then you can, in some jurisdictions, go through the red degrees. But when they go through these degrees, you have to spend a year in each degree, research and write research papers and deliver that paper before the lodge before you can get into the 2nd degree. Same to the 3rd, etc., etc., etc. So one of them is writing a paper on how the craft degrees of the R.E.R. are completely veiling Pasquale's arithmosophy. Anyways, so he suddenly carries on this mythology, right? Now we jump in. This is an image of a regular recognized by the Grand Lodge of Texas, R.E.R. First Degree Apprentice Lodge in Porto Alegre, Brazil. You notice that stations are different. Notice that there is no central altar because, as in most continental degrees, the center is populated by the tracing board. You see the hand-drawn, painted Haute-Grades in the east, the charter, the delta of Et Tenebrae Comprehendus, the light, darkness comprehend not, and their awesome lodge banner. This lodge was in the middle of the. This lodge was literally in the middle of the countryside. It's in a barn, literally. it's in a barn, and then you come in and you go to the lodge. At the end of it, they serve this like three or four course of meat, all barbecue, Brazilian style barbecue. Insane, dude. Like, we should do meals like that. Anyways, back to the talk. R.E.R. Craft Degree, secondary companion. On the left is the tracing board, which now has the second password on the pillar. The blazing star becomes a symbol, and they keep the symbol of dirigite obliqua. Again, very similar to the symbols that we receive nowadays, very similar to the strict observance. Third degree, they do something a little different now. We have a master's tracing board, quite similar to that which we are used to, right? Nothing crazy there. They also have in the center what would cover the tomb. It would cover the tomb, and it has, if it's in bad English, J-A, or if it's in proper Hebrew, Yud-He. And on the right, you see the steps that the worshipful master, venerable master, would take over the tomb, over the shroud, over the candidate. And that's, again, something we miss in continental masonry. They also have this emblem of the left of a mausoleum. This mausoleum was said to contain, depending on which order you're talking about, the ashes of our past masters, the ashes of JBM, ashes of Carolus Montmartre. And of course, they carried on the symbol of the ship with a broken rudder and broken mast. It goes both ways on that, in my opinion. Maybe we can talk about that more in depth afterwards at the very end. So, just one more time, these are the three emblems of the 3 degrees. Order still stands. He makes the crooked straight. In hope and silence is my strength. Or I hope for better things, right? So now we jump into the 4th degree of the Rectified Scottish Rite, the Scottish Master of St. Andrew. This is a continuation of the usual Masonic myth. Again, they aren't talking about Templarism now. They're not talking about Carolus Montmartre and the R.E.R. They're not talking about this murdered sub-prior. They're not saying JBM is this and that. They're using the usual heremic myth we know. And then things start to shift here, okay? So in this degree, on the right, that's an image of a Scottish Master, not specifically C.B.C.S., but a Scottish Master Regalia from 1784. On the left, that is a modern Scottish Master C.B.C.S. Regalia, or R.E.R. Regalia. Just check where I'm at. Cool. This continues the Masonic myth, but now they fully explain the ancient mysteries through the first 3 degrees, these as representing the epochs of the history of mankind. They narrate now the destruction of the temple and the rebuilding of a spiritual temple. A quote from this degree. You see on the left, the ruins of the temple. Solomon's temple is destroyed. On the left is a 1784 rendition. On the right is a modern rendition. A quote from the degree. There is nothing stable in the world. Everything passes like smoke. Virtue, hope, and faith in a better future are alone imperishable. They alone can elevate mankind to that height from which he must triumph over all events of his life. Ad hoc stat, this marvelous edifice was rebuilt, and if similar causes should encompass its destruction again, it is destined to yet arise again, still more beautiful and glorious. You have come among us today like the dispersed masons of the first temple came to of old to Jerusalem, and you seek to cooperate in the building of that sanctuary which we raise to virtue and beneficence. Like Zerubbabel, we seek to reassemble the workmen to assist in this sublime task. Brethren, are you willing to unite with us in this important labor? Next in the degree, on the left is a 1784 Ecosse, not specifically R.E.R. In the center is a modern redrawing of the shroud or the cover of the tomb, because I was sick of seeing the wrong letters. On the right is a modern redrawing of the tracing board. These would be placed one on top of each other, and they'd be unveiled as the candidate goes through the degree. So on the right, that would be in the center. The one in the middle would be on top of it, and the candidate would go around the room, and with a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other, he would peel up the corners of that altar cloth, of that tracing board, and reveal new meanings of these symbols. And eventually, so as he goes through these, he would unveil, I don't know if y'all can see my mouse or not, but if you can, he'd unveil these one after another. Then eventually he would see that we have the symbols of the holy place, right? And we can go into a full 2-hour discussion just on that. And the Golden Dawn probably does the best job of actually explaining that to people in their 110 degree. Exactly, that as well, in the Swedish Rite. And then finally, this space where the triangle, the red triangle is, that would actually be a place where a gold delta would be placed. And in the white space would be, exactly, a certain kind of censer, but something with a giant flame, a wet alchemical mass. And when you finally unveiled that, you would come to see and unveil the lost word on the left. And they would tell you, as you come to this section, you would unveil the lost word. You would recover, just like in some instances, we have that in the 13th degree today of the modern Scottish Rite. You would lift up that word, that plate, which has the JBM, Yud He Vav He, and you'd pronounce the name with vigor and force. And once you pronounce it, an officer would light that flame you see in the east. And they would exclaim that the word has been recovered. Yes, yeah, kind of. They don't do that as detailed as they do in the 13th degree, but kind of. So this would occur. You'd raise it up. You'd invoke the divine name, Yahweh. Now, hold on. Let's pause. Someone mentioned earlier JBM, right? We've seen that book printed on the new version of Magnum Opus. As I think it was an I, though, right? IBM. Yeah, International Business Machines. So JBM, obviously, like we've discovered, it means to us American Masons, it's the 3 passwords, right? JBM. Oh, wait. In America, we learn the passwords wrong. In America, we learn BJM. That sounds dirty, doesn't it? In most jurisdictions, it's JBM. You learn J, then B, then M. It also means, according to the SO, Jacobus Virgandus de Molay. It could also mean Jean-Baptiste Willermoz. So there's all kinds of interpretations to what that JBM is. Yeah, we learn our first letter, our first password is B, right? In America. Our second password is J. Our third password is M. Most continental and the older ones are J, B, M. America did it different because we're America. So there's a lot of veils there on what that means. After this comes up, the next tracing board is an image of Hiram resurrected. That is in the center. Literally, it is the resurrection of Hiram in the sign of the degree. And just for the moment, I'm going to show my video for a second. I don't know if it's going to work out well. The sign of the degree is Hiram resurrected in this white robe, shielding his eyes from the brilliance of the divine light in the east. Right? It's so bright he has to shield his eyes. That is essentially the grade sign. Finally, on the right, you have an image of the New Jerusalem, which has extreme importance and relevance in the classical Kabbalah, in Revelations, in Rosicrucianism, in alchemy, in the Issa, in the French traditions. And it is an image of, quote from the degree, the temple of the old law has now given way to the New Jerusalem, and on the summit of the mystic Zion is shown the Lamb of God bearing the standard of omnipotence acquired by his atoning immolation. They're setting you up for alchemical workings. The time has come to announce to you, brethren, that our order is Christian in the largest and highest sense of the word. As such, it calls and seeks to unite in its labors all those who, whatever their creed and belief, and without mental reservation, aspire to the fulfillment of the chief Christian maxim, which is glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. So that is their fourth degree. As a quick, we're just only going to spend a moment, as a quick segue of where Willermoz got this from. The Eloquent ninth degree, depending on which versions of the degrees you're looking at, 9th, 10th. Grand Alou of Zerubbabel, which has the subgrades of Chevaliers d'Orient and Commandeur d'Orient. He says, quote, I am Zerubbabel, prince of the line of David. May the king have mercy on our nation. May he allow us to rebuild the holy temple, to observe the sacrifices, and reconstruct that which the foreign powers and our sins have destroyed to the foundations. The difference between the modern Scottish Rite version of this and the Eloquent version is that the modern Scottish Rite takes it philosophically, whereas the Eloquent literally invokes a shitload of demons in your initiation, and you're taught to deal with them. And during your practice, you have to spend, first you have a 3 days operation, which you draw some crazy circles. On the right, that's one of the examples. You have to call forth all these spirits and summon them and submit them, much like the last week of the Abramelin operation. So in this version, they take the warring between Jerusalem and their captors as a symbol or prototype or archetype of man battling with his own inner demons, battling with his klipot. So it takes on a classical Kabbalistic perspective, and it makes the writings of Luria, and it makes them truly practical and helps you manifest them through ritual. Yes, and to summon the serpent and step on its head. Exactly. These are just a couple examples of old French Rite aprons. On the left, it looks pretty nice. It's just like some guys on horses about to go do battle. On the right, we're pretty familiar with that, Liberté de Passage, you know, the 3 skulls of which come into the Cohen as well in the Scottish Rite. Now we have a little bloodier one on the left. Like there's some decapitated heads. That looks like fun. So, anyways. You see this, so it's talking about how we're doing this now, how the legacies are. There's some of this in the 13th degree. There's some of this in the 14th, some of this in the 18th, perhaps. You know, there's some of this in the 15th. Definitely some things lacking. And then now we're going to jump to the inner order of the C.B.C.S, which, as we said, was secret, even to those 4th degree Haute-Grades members. This is called white masonry because the temple is literally draped in white. This narrates the secret oral tradition, expounding upon the Templar myth of the Strict Observance, and fulfills the continuation of von Hund's Templar tradition. The tradition in the degrees, the legend of the degree, is said to stem from India, through Egypt, through Pythagoras, through the Essenes, to John the Baptist, the Templars, the Knights of Malta, Robert the Bruce, Order of St. Andrew, to today. So it's extremely romantic, extremely fanciful, but a highly interesting thing to contemplate and to try to see what they're talking about as a spiritual lineage, an inspired lineage. On the right, that's a version from Fernandez. On the left, that's a modern example of a C.B.C.S. 5th or 6th degree temple. In this degree, we obviously bring forth some of the key symbols of the Templars, 2 men riding a horse. We bring forth key symbols of the banners. These were on the positioned as they are, just like they are here in the temple. The Rosicrucian emblems and alchemical emblems of the phoenix, the pelican. I don't think we need to go over that. You all understand what that means. But interestingly, in the 6th degree, the prefix says, quote, receive this mantle, principal ornament of a knight, a symbol of Christian charity and brotherhood, through which you must assist and protect the poor, as our master Saint Martin de Tours, and cover the faults of your brothers. Let us pray. Almighty and eternal God, Deign to pour forth upon thy servants this vestment of light and the grace of thy benediction, so that, supported by the power of thy light, he may be armed by thy celestial aid against all adversity, so that in this tenebrous age he may never be troubled by the tempest of combat which he may come to bear. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. And if you have ever gone through Cohen or Swedish Rite degrees, you see some of the import of the body of light that they're putting forth there. So that's all pretty simple. It's essentially a Christian knightly Freemasonry. And these symbols are extremely paramount in the Swedish Rite. They've maintained these symbols perfectly. It's funny when you're on Texas Freemasons or Freemasonry and they say that people get mad that the Swedish Rite only allows Christians. No, this does happen in Norway. But yeah, it originally happened in Sweden, yes. But it definitely happens in Norway. People get up in arms about this idea that, oh, they only let in Christians. That's so non-Masonic because the way we do things in America. They don't remember that Rosicrucian ideal of conforming to the customs of the country in which you reside. I find that rather ironic. I do want to say it is 8:59, and there is this tradition going on Texas Freemasons all over the world about a 9 o'clock toast. So I know we're going long, but I've got probably 10 more minutes. Let's do a toast at 9 p.m., which it is. Let's pause for just a moment. Grab a drink if you don't have one, all right? And I'll be right back. Grab a drink, and let's make it happen. Perfect. Just as one brother said, beverage has been acquisitioned. I hope you all have a beverage to raise. As we know, brethren all over the world are doing a toast at this time, at least in this time zone. So raise a glass and a toast to all of you, brethren, and to all of our brethren dispersed over this vast world. May we all come together in peace, joy, fraternity. May we come together as equals. May we come together to share, to learn, to give love. The glory of the eternal truth. May that philosopher's stone, the summum bonum, manifest in each of our hearts, that royal secret which dissolves all mysteries of heaven and of earth. To you, amen. And with that, let's get into the double secret class of Willermoz's C.B.C.S. The diagram on the left is an image from Willermoz's hand of the universal table of Pasquale Zello Cohen. Dude was obviously not much of an artist and didn't have a protractor at the time. On the right, that is the key to the universal table, which matches up with it. In the center, you have the first page of the second section of the Grand Professe lecture. He had very good handwriting, but did not draw circles very well. Maybe that's why his magic sucked. Anyways, so in these degrees, 7th degree Chevalier Professe, and then 8th degree of Grand Professe. Like I said, it was less of an initiation, more of a profession, a knightly monk style profession of virtues, of obedience, of dedication to the church, the religion, spirituality, and quite brilliant. And then followed by an extremely long lecture, which is essentially a Cliff Notes version of Pasquale's Reintegration of Beings. And by Cliff Notes, I mean it's still like 50 pages. So ain't that much of a Cliff Notes. But it was his way of maintaining Pasquale's mythology, cosmology, arithmosophy, theosophy, worldview, magical perspective, which stemmed from the Gnostic traditions, the Rosicrucian traditions, the alchemical traditions. It was his way of preserving it in regular Freemasonry. And let's get in. Everyone knows about that. These things have been published to a degree. Yeah, condensing the extant fragments. Yeah. And one of the cool things about the new publication I'm working on is that we compare multiple versions of all those and my attempt at a scholarly translation thereof. But missing a page. There we go. It is rumored that at this stage, EC work, Elocoan work would begin. That has been rumored for a long time. But from new letters that we've translated spanning 30 years from 1781 to 1810 between Willermoz and Prince Charles of Hesse-Cassel, who was one of the most influential Masons of the 18th century, we have undeniable proof that he was indeed initiated the Elocoan 15, 20, 30 years after the dissolution of that order. Yeah, most definitely. But he was still, at the 8th degree, he brought them into the Elocoan. In 1781, Willermoz discusses the various high-grade esoteric alchemical hermetic rites of the 18th century, those who are preparing to meet and compete at the Convention of Wilhelmsbad. Yes. And plants the seeds not only for the R.E.R, C.B.C.S, and Ordre de Grand Professe, but for Pasquale's Cohen to be secretly implanted beyond the 8th degree of Grand Professe. He also reveals to Prince Charles that their primary intention is not only to deepen the moral and chivalric virtues of the C.B.C.S degrees, but specifically to inculcate the cosmology and spiritual worldview of Willermoz's beloved teacher, Pasquale, and his magical Elocoan. Despite what modern commentators may claim, here Willermoz makes clear again and again in his own words his admiration of Pasquale's EC, which he proclaims as superior to every other rite, for its foundation in truth. Truth which is verifiable, tried, and will be tested by each candidate, who either will or will not be brought to that supreme truth. If it does not work for you, you know the system doesn't work. If it works for you, Willermoz also reveals that as of October 1781, very early in this time, that though the EC had been officially dissolved after the death of Pasquale in Haiti, Willermoz's students and the brethren of the C.B.C.S's secret class, the Order of the Grand Professe, were practicing the EC, and that he was initiating his highest members into the Roi-Croix degree. Likewise, the Cohen Temple in Haiti continued to operate independent of the French Grand Lodge, and there's an entirely, completely different lineage, which gets way more voodoo than it does Martinist, actually, coming out of Haiti. Some modern historians' perspective on Willermoz and his rites. Pierre Noël summarizes that Willermoz's rite inculcated, quote, a progressive revelation of the theosophical doctrine and teachings of Martinist of Pasquale. Willermoz's C.B.C.S. therefore took the best of von Hund's strict observance, together with the philosophy of Pasquale's Elocoan, and made a palatable system that would be preserved by Freemasons in perpetuity. Henrik, or Henry, depending on who you're asking, translations in language, proclaims, quote, in fact, l'Ordre des Elocoans functioned as an inner order of the rectified Scottish Rite, or as a masonry beyond masonry. Yeah, totally Henrik, but I keep seeing in English journals, Henry. It's just like saying Jacques or Jacobus or Jake. Or Martinez, Martine, Pasquale, Pasquale. Post-revolution, well, I skipped something. In a letter dated 1810 to Prince Charles of Hesse, Willermoz talked of the order's struggles due to the reign of terror almost 20 years ago, and the French Revolution. And he talks about the order's eventual resurrection, this was actually new to me. This just shows how much I don't know. This showed me that it resurrected under the national rulership of Napoleon Bonaparte, whose older brother served as Grand Master of the Grand Orient of France from 1805 to 1806. Their families were intricately involved in the resurrection of Freemasonry. Post-revolution, the C.B.C.S. resumed its work in 1806, and Willermoz continued to diligently work in the quarries. The order aligned itself with the Grand Orient, and Willermoz dedicated himself to the order until his death at 94 years old, May 29th, 1824. He's buried at Loyal Cemetery in Lyon, and the words De Profundis, which any Eloquent will know exactly what prayer he's talking about, is inscribed at the base of his tombstone. There's a brief jump into Willermoz's C.B.C.S. Let's jump into, So in the I have done, most of my translations were from the original 1782s, and then comparing Helvet and et cetera, I'm trying to pick the best ones of each. Use the oldest ones as the foundation, but sometimes it's okay to use some innovations. Like Robert Ambulon's lecture is a lot better than this 1782 lecture because it's not 20 minutes long. So a little bit about their legacy, the legacy of these French Haute-Grades. One of them is the BNF Baylot FM4 15 manuscript. That is the call number. It is commonly called those names on the left. Everyone calls it Santo Domingo, which is funny because it's not even a French name. But on the right, that is from this manuscript, that is the oldest known drawing of the encampment of the Princes of the Royal Secret. This manuscript contains the oldest known version, at least to me, of the Ordre de Royal Secret degrees that became eventually the Franken manuscript that eventually became the ancient accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. I know that Joseph, I always say Hebrew, Joseph, Joe, Arturo, etc., are working on a translation of this manuscript. From what I've heard, the 25 degrees of the ORS are quite similar to the English version in the 1783 Franken manuscript, but they're almost identical. My main interest as a Martinist was in the Martinist sections that no one ever wants to talk about. After the 25th degree, they show in very, very skeletal, fragmented aspects of the first and second degree Eloquent catechisms. Very fragmented, very skeletal. They also have a lecture from Pasquale, which he condemns Freemasonry. As early as 1750s, they were already saying that Freemasonry had lost its way, that it wasn't what it used to be, which I find ironic. There's also a formula for incense that uses poppy, so that would get you high as hell. No wonder you're having visions. There's also a sort of registry of chief officers of the order. One of them is Mulguer, who happened to be stationed in Santo Domingo. So I'd be interested in talking to you about who was specifically involved in that and who you think this comes from. But we do know that it has Pasquale's grief, or his signature, right there in the bottom left. And we do see that it has a form of an Eloquent initiatory circle, which most likely, yes, Moran copied from Pasquale himself. This leads me to a unverifiable conclusion that at the end of the 25th degree, Moran and Pasquale intended you to begin the Eloquent work. So I know that they're coming out with that new manuscript translation of that. I translated the Cohen sections about 4 years ago, and we've been circulating it privately. Been waiting to hopefully publish it in Masonic publication. If not, we'll just release that as a book at some point, because everything's getting released anyways. Might as well. Yeah, I sent it in a year ago, but getting responses a pain in the ass apparently. So with that, here's a brief, very trimmed down legacy of these degrees. Is that you have three currents. On the left, you have the Willermoz current. On the center, you have Pasquale. On the right, you have the Moran current. On the left, you have von Hund, down to Willermoz, down to the Neo-Templar orders, which are both the Masonic Templar orders, as well as the very spurious, all kinds of crazy, weird orders like Osti. And then, yeah, I emailed that directly to Brent, and he was really hot and heavy at first. But in the center, you have Pasquale's Hello Cohen, its existence in the Baylot, the Franken, which dropped the Baylot, and then you have the modern ASR. On the far right, you have Moran's ORS, which obviously filtered down to the Franken manuscript, which filtered down to the ASR. We're getting a little long. I took more liberties since I knew that we were online and not as pressed for time. Shoot me in the text. How are y'all feeling? Do you want to go another 15 minutes or 5 minutes? $60. That's nice. Let's just say after the death, so we're getting into modern politics and dissension. After the death of Willermoz, C.B.C.S. lines were regularly transmitted to the Directoire of Bourgogne, from there to the Directoire of Helvetia in Switzerland, where it has been active ever since as the mother priory of the C.B.C.S. From this Grand Priory of Helvetia, Switzerland, the modern lines of, on the left, the Martinist C.B.C.S. were reawakened first in 1901 by Eduardo Blitz, and then later by Robert Ambelon in his essentially World War II Reformation of Martinism. In the center, you see the 30s and beyond Masonic charters from that same body. And on the right, you see the weird stuff that occurred. So today, the C.B.C.S. exists as regularly practiced Masonic rites in the center and as Martinist rites on the left around the world. Political difficulties continue to exist within Freemasonry with this rite specifically in battles between the UGLE and the GLNF, the English Grand Lodge, which I'm going to call ugly, and GLNF, the Grand Lodge of France. UGLE, GLNF. There have been multiple treaties of recognition and unity formed and broken due to political pressure from the UGLE. In France, there have even been 2 civil court proceedings in which the French Grand Lodge was ordered to cease their C.B.C.S. activity and yield to the C.B.C.S. Grand Lodge of the GPDG, Grand Prairie des Gaules. So let me back up. 1778, 1782, depending on how you're counting. We found the C.B.C.S., right? 1828, post at the Willermoz, the rites from France get transferred to Helvetia in Switzerland. From there, essentially come all the main lineages ever since. Okay? We're talking now about the Masonic branch in the center pillar. So in the central pillar, they chartered a Masonic, regular Masonic branch under the Grand Priory of America in 1934. They also chartered the Grand Prairie des Gaules, GPDG. So France actually lost their C.B.C.S. lineage. They stopped practicing it. They had to regain it from the Swiss they gave it to. Then was England, then Germany, Belgium, Portugal, et cetera, to today, right? What has been interesting is this weird dissension that continues to happen between ugly and France. Political accession continues in the U.S. as well, where the GPA, Grand Prix of America, is an invitation body only limited to 243 members, divided to 3 prefectures spanning the entire U.S., with no more than 81 members per prefecture. Note, the maximum number has never been reached. They don't initiate, they don't invite. It is literally a past Grandmaster's Club that goes through a exterior ceremony and never talks about the actual meanings of Willermoz and Pasquale. They don't talk about arithmosophy. They definitely don't initiate the Elkohen. So that's not what was intended. So here's where it gets crazy. Despite that many prominent Masons that we all know, I'm not going to name any names, are members of this American Masonic C.B.C.S., the GPA, the American Grand Encampment of the Knights Templar, i.e. the York Rite, has for years tried to shut down this the competing GPA, which they see as a threat to their authority over Templar-inspired rites. Right. In 2011, the Grand Encampment took it a step further, and they obtained a charter from the GPSRRRO. That has got to be the longest initials for an organization. Off memory, Grand Priory Scottish Reunited Rectified Rite of the USA. Without acknowledging the previous legitimate Masonic body, the GPA. The GPSRRRO, Aquitania, Britain, was already considered spurious by the majority of C.B.C.S. bodies, and it now seeks to contend with the lines of the Swiss Priory, where the rite has been based ever since 1828. To make things worse, the Grand Encampment of the Knights Templar, York Rite, passed the following resolution in 2012 at their 65th Triennial Conclave. Quote, someone brought this up earlier. Thus, any Sir Knight who accepted or accepts membership in an unrecognized and unsanctioned Masonic Templar Order after August 15, 2012 is in violation of his knightly vows and is subject to Templar discipline under Section 209 of the Statutes of the Grand Encampment and the disciplinary rules adopted pursuant to this section. End quote. Thus, the Grand Encampment of the USA, the York Rite, continues to prove that they do not understand the history of the C.B.C.S., nor are they acting in the spirit of Willermoz and Pasquale's traditions and legacy, but are solely interested in a political and jurisdictional domination. The GPI countered and tried to state for themselves that the C.B.C.S. is, quote, a chivalric body and is not a Templar body because it does not include the Order of the Red Cross, Order of the Malta, and does not require the Royal Arch degree as a prerequisite to Templar orders. End quote. Because we're not talking about that later English Templarism. They are dealing with an earlier French Templarism, which supersedes that English Templarism. They're not competing. They're not claiming to compete. They're not claiming to be the Templarism. It's a completely separate sect, rite, tradition, egregore. But that's also erroneous, that statement. Because according to the GPA, quote, to him who holds the C.B.C.S., there is nothing beyond the ne plus ultra of the craft. It is the summit of Christian knighthood and is the only comparable order in this country, America, approaching civil knighthood in Europe. It is guarded carefully, obviously, and only conferred infrequently upon those who are deemed worthy. But again, like we said, it's not actually conferred the way it's supposed to. It's a past Grand Master's Club. The GPA's previous statement denying being a Templar order is obviously meant to deflect political heat from the York Rite of Freemasonry and UGLE in turn. So sadly, to end that long rant about politics, British dissension again threatens the order in ways that remind one of the initial purposes and intent of Jacobite Masonry and the Haute-Grades that are their legacy. This is literally the exact same thing as what the ESO was talking about regarding their order and ruling powers and the Templars. It's a repetition. It's a repetition of Hanoverian, German, English dominating a French system. It's a repetition of Zerubbabel. It's a repetition of Robert the Bruce. It's a repetition of King Philip the Fair. It's a repetition of the SO. So just interesting. Pascal is very big on this idea of types and that things repeat themselves throughout history. So if Pascal is alive, he would call that a type of Zerubbabel. Let's get back to, after we've talked about the bullshit that goes on in Masonic politics, let's get back to the core, the essence of why we're supposed to be studying these things. What is the purpose of it? It's not about lineage. It's not about titles. It's not about who is what. It's about defend the weak. Be generous. Give freely to those in need. Wipe the tears of the unhappy. If possible, remove their source. Comfort the widow and the orphan. Be a father to the lonely and defenseless children. Find a worthy living to those who have wandered astray. To work, show discretion and obedience. to sacrifice time and resources when this is demanded, to our order's ideals, to support fellow travelers in need. And lastly, to guide the sincere candidate, the remembrance of his divine origin, and a personal experience of the deity within and without. Today, the C.B.C.S. is passed down through a variety of lines, both as invitational Masonic bodies and privately within the Martinist tradition. Just as the trials and legends of the original Templar Order, as we told in the Royal Order of Scotland, in the Jacobite retelling of the Strict Observance, and in Willermoz's rectification in his C.B.C.S. Ad hoc stat. The order still stands, and we work and we hope for better. There's not a lot of good information out there. There's not a lot of depth out there on these traditions, but here's a couple sources. The top one has some outer order strict observance rituals. Committed to Flames has some outer order American versions of the R.E.R, some Quater Coronatum lectures, and some brief blurbs in the Herodom.
Thank you again for coming to this presentation. And if you're interested in learning more about the legacy of Jean-Baptiste Willermoz through the Martinist tradition, an independent sovereign tradition, and if you're interested specifically in learning about how to join a Martinist order, you can use these Martinist resources: the OMS website, martinism.net, the OMS YouTube, upon which you're probably watching this, the OMS Facebook, and lastly, the private Facebook group for aspirants. This is a group specifically for people who are looking to join the OMS and receive guidance upon the application process and the required pre-associate process and operations that must be submitted. Through our work, may the light of beneficence shine forth, inspired by the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, in fulfillment of Willermoz's vision, his intention to resurrect Templarism as a spiritual discipline of honor that illuminates the darkness within and without, and brings man back to the knowledge of his origin, to the glory of the grand architect of the universe. Yours truly before the flambeau, Cord Lacroix.